Dr. Mark DeYoung, a licensed marriage and family therapist in Fort Worth. While he provides in home therapy services to a variety of clients with marriage, depression, anxiety, and parenting issues, his most recent work has been counseling couples in the practices he developed and describes in his first book, Revolutionary Marriage, which was published a year ago. While the book is a new release, Mark is no novice at helping couples overcome obstacles. He's practiced as a family and marriage therapist for more than 25 years, is a clinical fellow of the AAMFT, and trained in the Gottman Institute techniques. Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I was going to say, you see a lot of struggling marriages. What do you think is causing the problems?
That's a complex question. And so let me try to answer it in two ways. One, in my book, I offer a model that is based in the Genesis 3 curse of Adam and Eve, where we talk about the fact that because of that relationship brokenness, even between them, there's three things that happen in relationships. One, we damage each other. We say things that are hurtful. We disappoint each other, and then number two, that creates distance. So as we create injuries between the two of us, we grow apart. And then the third thing is that the relationship dies. So that's the model I present in my book. I think then larger than that model on an individual basis is kind of the societal or cultural issues that are going on. The media, television, the internet presents ideas to us that marriage is meant to be this romantic adventure, that marriage is meant to be about satisfying myself, that if I get married, then I'm going to reach some self-actualization and I should be happy in marriage. And many of us who are married or who have gone through marriage figure out pretty quickly that it's hard work, and that the fantasy of falling in love and it being really easy and us getting along and it's going to be wonderful is just not real. It's a myth. And so I wrote this book to help with those struggles, because we've got to have tools and resources that help us deal with those myths and not see marriage as something that is going to make us a better person in terms of having our fantasies met, but marriage is going to make us a better person because we become more Christ-like.
I love that. You brought up the thought about expectations and how that can really kind of set people up for failure. Could you talk about that a little bit more, what you've seen and how that's a real stumbling block?
Yeah. It is really common for me to have a couple come into therapy and they had this wonderful whirlwind of a dating relationship, and it was romantic and the engagement goes well, and then they get into sharing life with each other and they realize, oh my goodness, this is harder than we thought. And so then they start questioning, well, are we really meant to be together? And so the question in therapy when I meet with them is maybe we weren't just made for each other. That the myth in our society is that I've got one person made for me. It's my soulmate. And that line in Jerry Maguire, "You complete me," that fantasy, that myth is just not true. Though it is really nice to find somebody who becomes our best friend, and that's what we hope for in every marriage, is a great friendship first. To get there, isn't something that's just natural. It requires effort and work on both people's parts.
Well, that's a great segue into something else I was going to ask you then. You talked about the getting there. How do
Yeah.
you help a couple get?
Yeah. So in my work with couples, one of the things that I found was that working in therapy with couples for an hour at a time just didn't work. A lot of times we'd get a good fight started, or we'd get just to the issue, and then the hour is up and we all walk away. I, as the therapist, they, as the couple, walk away from that and we're frustrated because we're not getting anywhere. So I do what's called intensive sessions. And so I meet with couples for multi-hour sessions. And that really allows us to dig down into the issues and dig down into what's really going on with them, to help them understand the dynamics behind what's being said. It takes a while to get to that. So we really spend sessions with me are multi-hour. A first session with me is a 3-hour assessment and planning session. And a lot of people hear that and they go, wow, that's going to be exhausting. And that's true. It is tiring. It's exhausting, but it is well worth it.
How have you seen that work? Do you have, I know when we talked earlier, you were telling me about a couple that had some infidelity issues. How have you seen your approach of really digging down and taking some intensive time? How have you seen that be successful?
Yeah. So by having longer periods of time together, we can slow the process down, and we can give couples an opportunity to really listen and really understand not just what's being said, but what's not being said. And by teaching those empathy skills and vulnerability skills, because it takes both. It takes not just being empathetic with your partner, but it takes being vulnerable with your partner. So not only do I want to teach a partner how to listen well, but I want to teach a partner how to talk well and share what's really going on internally. When those things happen, that's when we really develop a depth of connection. It's at the places, for me, in working with couples, it's not learning to communicate better. It's not learning to have better or more frequent date nights, though those things can be helpful. It's really at digging into the deeper depths of understanding. Because when I hear my partner's decision to spend time away from me had less to do with that they don't like me and more to do with their own insecurities and that they want their own sense of shame, then I can understand that. And I can be empathetic about that. And I cannot feel as angry or hurt by that.
Well, that really sounds good. And I know in your book you talked a little bit about, we talked about those 3 steps, the distance and the depth, and then you kind of had a way to remake those steps, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we have damage in relationships, and then that grows us apart. And then ultimately, if that continues, the relationship dies. And nobody wants that for a marriage or a relationship. So I offer antidotes or fixes, if you will, for those 3 things. The antidote for damage is reconciliation. And the first steps in reconciliation is forgiveness. And so what I think couples need to realize is forgiveness in a marriage is not something we do for the big stuff, though we should do that. Forgiveness is something we do in a moment by moment, day in, day out basis. Because I have expectations about how a day is going to go. And sometimes my spouse meets those expectations and sometimes they don't. Not because they don't care, but just life happens. And I have to be willing to be forgiving about that so that I can reconcile and remain in relationship. When we choose not to forgive, we then experience the distance. So the next the next step is not, so we start with reconciliation, that we recognize reconciliation is a continual process. The second thing is that we recommit. We make a commitment on our wedding day. We state some kind of vows, whether it's the traditional marriage vows or ones we've written, but we make a commitment to, this is how I want to live life with you, and I want to share life with you. Well, we need to be recommitting to that all the time. And I talk in my book about the way we show or live out that recommitment is we remain both present and here with our spouse. I am present and I am here. So present meaning I make time for you. I am consistently making time to be together so that we can be friends. I mean, you can't be friends with somebody you don't spend time with. And then when I am present and making time for you, I am fully here with you. I spend that time, I invest, I am emotionally, I'm mentally, I physically present, but I'm fully present with you in those moments so that we can actually truly connect. I'm not spending time on my phone. I'm not disengaged with a book or a TV show or walking away frequently to go deal with the kids even. I truly decide to be here and present with you. And then the third thing is kind of probably why one of the revolutionary ideas and why the book is called Revolutionary is that I see the antidote to death as resurrection. And that's a spiritual idea. My job as a marriage partner is to bring life to my spouse. And I do that through sacrificial love, living out the sacrificial love that Christ offers. I do that in terms of sacrificing and giving to my spouse. That's what brings life to her. And so when we sacrifice, just like Christ sacrificed, we help bring life to our partner. We do it in the way we speak to them, the words that we use. We do it in the ways that we serve them, by laying down our own desires to meet their desires and their needs. So the three are reconciliation, recommitment, and resurrection.
I love that. And as you're talking about those practical steps, I know practical steps need practice. And you provide that in your counseling, but then also you're going to be holding your first retreat coming up this winter. And that's where you're going to give couples some opportunities to practice, whether they do it with you ahead of time or anytime through your counseling practice. Can you talk a little bit more about that, how you can actually make the rubber meet the road?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I've been to a lot of marriage conferences as a Christian man and married to my wife for nearly 30 years. We've had an opportunity to go to a lot of marriage conferences, and some of those have been great, and some of them have been, I don't know, maybe even a little disappointing. And here's been my frustration with those. A lot of traditional marriage conferences fill a room with 250 to 1,000 people or more, and we get a great, entertaining, fun speaker, and that's exciting and all. But I've always felt like when I walked away from that going, well, that was fun, but now we got to go back and do real life. And that's been hard. And so when I wrote this book, I wanted to create a set of information and a set of supports and tools that then I could use with a small set of couples. And so I've arranged for a retreat with 15 couples at a time. I don't want more than that. I want a small subset of couples where we can really dig in and work for 2 days together and share intimacy, not only between a husband and a wife, but intimacy with other people in the room, and it really be connecting versus sitting in a room with hundreds of other people and not really connecting, but we actually share our struggles together and it be an intimate time. It's been a challenge in the COVID season to get this thing scheduled and get it worked out, but it looks like we're set. I think things are going to be in an opened up kind of way. And so December, the very first weekend of December, we are scheduled. We're going to have the retreat in at Camp Hoblitzel in Midlothian, Texas. It's a Salvation Army camp. And we've got a fabulous facility there with hotel rooms for the couples and a big meeting space in between all the hotel rooms. Just feels like a nice hotel retreat center, but it's outdoors. It's at a camp. There's a lake, and we'll have meals provided by the facility there. And it will be, like I said, limited to 15 couples. So the room is going to be small. It'll be an opportunity to spend time with your spouse outdoors, as well as, so it will be retreat-like, where you will both have times to really engage in intimate and deep conversations, but also times to just be outside and have some fun and relax and get away even from the kids. So yeah, that's what we're going to be doing. I'm hoping to do those once a year, maybe twice a year if we get some popularity going. But I really like this retreat center. I think it'll be really helpful to couples.
Well, you know, another thing that you've been doing is taking revolutionary marriage and making it into a curriculum so churches can even make this more available. Talk to me about that. It's some pretty exciting news.
Yeah, I think when I originally wrote the text of the book, it was a lot longer. And it became a discussion with my editor about, what do you really want to accomplish with this book? And so we wrote the book. We edited the book in a way that it's presentable to a couple to really help a couple in the moment and encourage couples in the moment. There was a lot of material pulled from the book that was more about some of the theology behind marriage, some of the history behind marriage, and maybe some of the ideas of how, as a church, the larger church as a whole, we can do a better job with marriage. And so I've taken that material and developed some additional curriculum that is for church leaders who face dealing with marriages all the time. And what is a pastor? What is a volunteer in a certain ministry? What are they going to do when they sit down with this hurting marriage in front of them? And how are they going to approach that? So I really think as a church, we're at a crossroads where we're going to have to, because of and I talk about this in the book, but we've had dramatic changes when it comes to marriage in our country and in the world. What makes a marriage? How do we define marriage? Who is married and who is not? Is a marriage two people living together? Do they have to have a marriage license? Is it gay marriage? Is it what define that? Our culture has really shaken that all up. And I think churches are at a crossroads that they need to begin to have a way to talk about this and make it talkable in a way that aligns with Scripture, that aligns with what Jesus taught, and then is presented in a way that helps bring people closer to a relationship with Christ. So that's what I've done with this curriculum, is really try to challenge even some of our traditional ways of thinking about defining marriage, moving it away from even sometimes the way the 1950s thought about it, and come up with a way so that we can actually help couples on the ground that are showing up broken in our church offices and in our church ministries.
Well, you had mentioned too that even in the church, especially young couples perhaps that have been raised in the church, and they have some expectations that then when they're not met in their marriage is really a stumbling block. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I heard this over and over and over again with young couples that would come to me. Here's the general scenario. Young men are told in their churches, you need to step up and be the spiritual leader of your household. And young women are told, you need to have your husband, you need to support your husband in being the spiritual leader of your household. The problem with that idea is, one, what's a spiritual leader look like? And two, that's pretty much related to gifting. Who has the gifts of being a spiritual leader and who doesn't? And so my book really approaches this from a different model where it's not about male female roles. For one, God created males and females to be different but equally valuable. And so when we talk about spiritual leader, we start creating hierarchies and somebody more important than, and I don't think that's useful. And what I was running into was young men who were like, I don't know how to do this, and I feel really inadequate. I don't know what to do. And young women who were frustrated because they were trying to submit and let their husband be the spiritual leader, but they were coming up disappointed, and they would try to encourage, and all it would come across as is kind of putting them down or discouraging them. So what I've suggested in both my book and in my curriculum is that we need to have a couple sit down and say, what's your gifting? And that there may be a wife who is far better spiritual leader than her husband. Let her be the one that really engages and teaches, and let the husband support those things in another way, and let his gifting in other areas support and encourage the marriage. We need to have conversations about gifting between a husband and a wife, and that they can be different, and that women can lead in certain areas and men can lead in other areas, and we can share in that, so that the marriage then becomes a better reflection of who God is. That's what we're supposed to do, be image bearers. And when we let those gifts come through, we're better image bearers.
Well, I like that point at the end again of bringing out the best in your spouse and doing that for God's glory. I know that was really a point of revolutionary marriage that you really unpacked quite a bit about God's glory. And anything else that you have there that fits in there?
Yeah, let me just tack on to that idea a little bit. One more thought about that. It's very clear when we look at the Genesis story of the creation of Adam and Eve. The very first telling of the creation of Adam and Eve is God saying, let us make man in our image. And so they did. They made them male and female in God's image. That means that men and women are to be equal and valuable reflectors of who God is. And I don't know if you haven't noticed, but men and women are different in a lot of ways. Now, in a lot of ways, we're the same too, but we're very different. And I think we should celebrate that as a church family, that men have wonderful gifts and talents and abilities because of being a man, but so do women. And unfortunately, we've overemphasized one gender than the other, and we need to celebrate both. We need to celebrate men and women and what they bring to the table. And that is definitely something that should be celebrated in a marriage. How are you celebrating your spouse? And I would ask a couple this question if they're watching this interview. What does your husband bring to your marriage in a unique gifting kind of way that reflects God's character? What does your wife bring to your marriage in a God-honoring, God-reflecting kind of way that the two of you can celebrate, so that the two of you combined better reflect who God is? That's what this is about. And that's why the subtitle of my book is How to Have a Marriage That Changes the World. It's when a husband and a wife do those things that they better reflect who God is, and people witness that changes the world.
You mentioned about that bringing life, and that life goes to the world. And then that kind of segues into some of your next projects. Would you like to share with that?
Yeah. So I'm gonna obviously do the retreats. We're going to hopefully get to share this curriculum with church leaders, and doing that with my church. I was able to do it at a Christian university recently, and that was well received. And then I'm started a new book, and it's probably going to be the more controversial book. So be praying about that. But I'm writing a book called Revolutionary Sex. Now, it's not a book about techniques. And if you're looking for something to help techniques or whatever, you're going to go to the wrong place. This isn't for that. This book is to change our attitudes. We've got some really mixed up, messed up attitudes about sex. And I want us to have just like we need to have a clearer, more biblical view of marriage. We can always grow in that area. We can have a clearer, more biblical view of sex. And so I'm working on that right now. That's kind of a next project that's coming along. And then there will be a third book that's coming called Revolutionary Parenting. And it's kind of like a tie. We're going to bring the marriage together. We're going to bring the intimacy and the sex together. And now, how do we raise these kids? And what do we do with them? What's that look like? And what's a biblical view of that? That goes beyond just getting the right set of punishments and rewards in place so that we keep our kids out of jail. It's got to be bigger and better than that.
Well, one of the things that I really like about you too, Dr. DeYoung, is you have a background helping adoptive parents and people who's had children from the foster care system.
Yeah.
And I know that there's many in the audience in our marriage. That's been a big movement in the church. You want to take a minute just to as we're talking about revolutionary parenting, just about your experience or anything there?
Sure. That's kind of where I cut my teeth in the mental health world. Is I started working with foster care agencies and have been an administrator in several foster care agencies, as well as then providing therapy to foster and adoptive families. And I've always said that adoptive parents that have been, or foster parents that have been called into this ministry, and it is a ministry, that have been called into this work, understand the nature of God adopting us into his family better than anybody else. Because you can pour your heart and your love and your sacrifice into the life of this child, and it is a needed and wonderful thing. And sometimes with all of your hopes and desires for them, they can end up rejecting that. And to understand the pain of that, the loss of that, I think they have a significant understanding of the hurt that God feels when we don't follow or share our life with him. Because that's everything that a parent wants. A parent wants to share their life with their kid, and their kid to share their life with them. It's all about the connectedness and relationship that we want. And so, I've enjoyed that kind of work, and it's really my hope that not only do we want image bearing to happen in marriage, but we want image bearing to happen with our children too. We want them to become better image bearers of who God is, and that's the goal of any kind of parenting.
Well, and that was a great preview of what is yet to come from you. So thank you so much for your
You're
insights
very
and for
welcome.
being here. And if you're a church, oh, absolutely. And if you're a church leader who would like to connect with Dr. DeYoung and Revolutionary Marriage, you can find us at SAMI or samarriage.org. Thanks again.
Thank you.